In America, we like to measure things. We measure our height, our weight, our income, and we use these measurements to compare ourselves to others. We even measure poverty. We call it the poverty line, a dollar amount that supposedly tells us who is poor and who is not. This line determines who qualifies for help, for food stamps, for housing assistance. It's a powerful line, this poverty line. It can mean the difference between having enough to eat and going hungry. The poverty line is calculated every year by the Census Bureau. They use a formula developed back in the 1960s. This formula is based on the cost of food. The idea was that a family should spend about 1/3 of its income on food. The poverty line is then set at 3 times the cost of a minimum food diet. Sounds simple, right? But this seemingly straightforward calculation has huge implications. It determines who gets counted among the poor. And being counted matters. It means access to essential resources, to a safety net when times are tough. It means the difference between barely scraping by and falling through the cracks. But is this line, this measure of poverty, still relevant in today's America? Can a formula devised decades ago accurately reflect the realities of living in poverty today? The answer, as we shall see, is a resounding no. The poverty line is outdated. It's time for a change. The poverty line has a history, a story told in dollars and cents. Back in 1963, when this measurement was first established, the poverty line for a family of 4 was about $3,100 a year. That's roughly $28,000 in today's money. Over the years, this line has been adjusted, tweaked to reflect inflation. In the 1960s and 1970s, there was a push to expand the social safety net. Programs like Medicaid and food stamps were created. The poverty line played a crucial role in determining eligibility for these programs. As the cost of living increased, so too did the poverty line. It went up in small increments, sometimes annually, sometimes less frequently. However, these adjustments have not kept pace with the real cost of living, especially in recent decades. The cost of housing, healthcare, and childcare has skyrocketed. Yet, the poverty line has not kept up. It remains tethered to the cost of food, a calculation that no longer reflects the economic realities of low-income families. The result? Millions of Americans are struggling to make ends meet, but they don't qualify as poor according to the official measure. They are the hidden poor, living in the shadows of a statistic that fails to capture their daily struggles. Since 1963, the poverty line has been adjusted for inflation, but the way we calculate it hasn't changed much. It's like using an old map to navigate a new city. The landmarks might be the same, but the roads and buildings have changed. The last significant change to the poverty threshold was in 1969. Back then, food made up a much larger portion of a family's budget. Today, housing, healthcare, and childcare consume a significantly larger share. Yet, the poverty line remains fixated on the price of food, a relic of a bygone era. Why hasn't it been updated? There are many reasons. Some argue that changing the poverty line would be too expensive. It would mean more people qualifying for government assistance. Others contend that the current measure is sufficient. They argue that it provides a reasonable baseline for determining need. But these arguments ignore the lived experiences of millions of Americans. They fail to acknowledge that the cost of living has changed dramatically. The poverty line, stuck in a time warp, no longer reflects the economic realities of today. Imagine for a moment that we updated the poverty line. Imagine a new measure, one that reflects the true cost of housing, healthcare, and childcare. What would happen? The answer is both simple and profound. More Americans would be classified as poor. This would have a ripple effect across society. First and foremost, it would mean an increase in the number of people eligible for government assistance. Programs like SNAP, food stamps, Medicaid, and housing vouchers would see a surge in enrollment. This would put a strain on resources, requiring increased funding and expanded services. But it would also mean that more Americans would have access to essential support. Families struggling to put food on the table would receive assistance. Children living in poverty would have access to healthcare and educational opportunities. In short, updating the poverty line would mean recognizing the true scope of economic hardship in America. It would force us to confront the uncomfortable reality that many more Americans are struggling than our current measures suggest. And it would create a moral imperative to address the root causes of poverty, to create a society where everyone has the opportunity to thrive. Now let's bring this into sharper focus with some figures. Currently, the federal poverty line for a family of 4 is set at approximately $26,500 per year. This amount is supposed to cover all basic needs, including housing, healthcare, food, and childcare. But what if we updated this measure to reflect today's true costs? According to recent studies, the actual amount needed for a family of 4 to meet their basic needs is closer to $50,000 per year. That's nearly double the current standard. Let's take a closer look at what this means. Under the current poverty line, many families earning just above $26,500 do not qualify for critical assistance programs. Imagine a family of 4 with a total annual income of $30,000. They are technically above the poverty line, but in reality, they are far from financially secure. Updating the poverty line to $50,000 would reclassify this family as living in poverty, making them eligible for programs like SNAP, Medicaid, and housing assistance. This would provide a safety net, helping them cover essential needs and giving their children a better chance at a healthy, stable life. This example highlights the gap between our outdated measures and the actual cost of living. It forces us to confront the uncomfortable truth that many more Americans are struggling than our current definitions of poverty suggest. Recognizing this would not only mean more people getting the help they need, but it would also push us as a society to address the root causes of poverty. The moral imperative is clear. Updating the poverty line is not just about numbers, it's about acknowledging the lived realities of millions of Americans and taking steps to ensure that everyone has the opportunity to thrive. We must ask ourselves, are we willing to face this reality and take action? The answer will shape the future of our society and the lives of countless families. It's time for a reality check.